Hello, fans, and welcome to Marlins Deep Dive. My name's Buddy Bengal. We're excited to be here, and we're going to be joining you each and every Friday to talk about all things Morehead City Marlins. As the 2020 season fastly approaches, we want to give you a little bit of an insight while you're at home to talk about what's going on, what's happened in the past as we celebrate the 2 championships the Morehead City Marlins have had over the last 2 years. Joining us today, we have our Director of Scouting, Jeff Romer, and our head coach, Jesse Lancaster. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thanks, buddy.
Thank you.
You guys.
Well, guys, let's jump right in. You know, the Morehead City Marlins coming out of 2018 had a historic season. We won our first Coastal Plain League Championship Series. It was a magical moment and a win. We swept Thomasville in the playoffs. And let's talk a little bit about roster composition. Let's talk about the 2019, coming off that historic season. You know, JR and Jesse, talk a little bit about how you wanted to put that roster together for 2019 and what you saw in 2018 that you wanted to carry over into the 2019 season.
Sure. You want to start it, JR?
Yeah, I can start off. I think certainly the 2018 pitching staff, arguably one of the most effective in CPL history, especially considering the modern era of summer ball, college baseball in general. I think we understood and continue to understand that having a deep, talented, and versatile pitching staff is the best way to consistently compete, give yourself the best chance to win most games. So replicating that was certainly a priority, although I think it manifested itself differently, whereas in 2018, we were effectively overloaded with high leverage relievers at the back of games, which, shorten ball games and stuff. We found that the 2019 personnel, we had more guys with experience and accomplish with length. And I think that sort of evolved into us using trailers, as we call them, guys that would go one time through the order to bridge between the starter and the leverage guys in the back.
Yeah, I agree. Those are conversations we had kind of in projection for that team in 18 as we recognized how valuable those back-end arms would be. Guys like Kenny Wells and Moser and Markland. And then, as the season progressed on, Mirabal and like Keenan kind of established some front-end roles on that team. And then going into 19, we recognized that we had some guys that were better suited to go, as JR mentioned, a little bit more lengthy at the start, maybe 2 times through the order. And guys like Blomster, Miles, Schultz, and those types of guys could get deeper into the ball game. And that led us into those piggyback type things that we discussed, or starters, trailers, that type of thing. But certainly the 18 team created a new culture in Morehead City. And I felt like the 19 team, the word for them, or the motto that we had, was just creating that vision, like starting a new vision for what could be consistent winning in this town.
And gentlemen, that was something that when both, you guys, Jesse, when you in 2017 and JR, you in 2018 came on board with us, one of the things that we talked about was keeping and creating a winning tradition and culture. And I know that was something you guys wanted to take from 2018 and circulate that into 2019.
Agreed. And, just sort of going back to that first point with the pitching staff, even though the 19 iteration didn't necessarily have the same efficiency numbers as the 18 staff in terms of WHIP, batting average against, and ERA, we still, in 2019, this past summer, led the league in ERA. We were 4% over the second-ranked team and 20% over the third-place team in that category. We were second in WHIP. We were tied for second in batting average against, and we were just fractionally off the leader in both of those categories. Obviously, we shattered the CPL single-season strikeout record at 576, which came out to 11 3/4 per 9 innings. Just a mind-boggling figure. And then broke our record from the 2018 summer with the strikeout-to-walk ratio, which in 2019 came in at 3.47, roughly 3.5. And so I think the translation there was that we had a deep staff, most of whom could consistently win in the zone, and they didn't hurt themselves with freebies and could limit damage by missing bats. Ultimately, a very good cocktail. And I wanted to stress the depth component, because it's not like we were just leaning on a few guys at the top of the rotation or a few guys at the back of the bullpen. At the end of the regular season, our innings leader only had 48 frames to his name. And of course, that was Eric Miles, 2019 Coastal Plain League Pitcher of the Year. And then on the back end, we had 6 different relievers who eclipsed 20 innings. So it was a really great group, top to bottom.
So, and when you guys are starting to think about putting our roster together and talking about looking, and is that obviously where you're starting? Is you're starting looking, saying, okay, we're going to look at pitching? Is that how you said we're going to transition from 18 to this 19 team? Was you wanted to start with pitching? And, you know, Jesse, I know you mentioned the back end of our bullpen, how really lights out. And I think we went through most of the playoffs. I don't know if our bullpen gave up a run in 2018 in the playoffs. Was that really where you guys started the 2019 roster, was building upon that pitching staff?
JR, I mean, if I recall, you know, at the end of 18, we, you know, in the playoff time, we're going over war board about returners that we wanted to bring back in 19. And that was a key thing when going to the 19 roster, is finally having some consistency with returners. And I think that had a large part in kind of the culture extending into last summer. But certainly, obviously, pitching's been a premier part of what we've tried to do. But we also, in addition to that, wanted to become a little bit more, I guess, prolific offensively than maybe what the 18 team was. The 18 team was good in its own right, but there was a big shift offensively from 18 to 19 as well.
No question. And the offense is sort of the third component I have here to touch on in a little bit regarding the 2019 roster build. But Buddy, just to kind of go back to your question about, you know, is that where it starts? I don't know if that's sort of the way we approach it or understand it, just because it isn't like a draft, like in pro ball, where a team shows its colors or its cards by putting an emphasis on this position group before another, or populating, you know, 75% of its top 20 picks or something on the mound, you know, showing a clear predilection to that component. With summer collegiate recruiting, it's really just an all-out blitz all at the same time. You know, as soon as the phones light up, you're just casting that net as wide as you can for every player that you think fits your culture and passes the, you know, kind of the barrier to entry for what we're looking for and what we expect production-wise. It's just, I think it's more goes into our identity and who we want to be. We're gonna take picture that we think up to numeric limit, who we think is going to help us, and we never lose sight of the fact that how important that is. And just sort of one final thing on the 2019 staff that I wanted to definitely mention is, you know, all these things being put in place, you know, on paper, and even as the players progress in the spring and you can start to even see what the summer might look like. Really the final and the most important component to that is deployment. And I'll, you know, tip my proverbial cap here to Jesse as the 2-time reigning Coastal Plain League Coach of the Year. You know, just putting all of the guys, or most of the guys, most of the time, into their best position to succeed. And that really is I think the translation between the individual nature of baseball, which is always a one-on-one battle, pitcher, hitter, fielder, and ball, what have you, to how does this guy slot into the rest of the roster, the rest of the personnel group, and then feel good about his contribution and what he's doing. And that's something, even going back to 2018, not to get off topic, that Jesse showed a really uncanny ability to do and sort of see in step with, you know, what we were talking about from a vision standpoint. Hey, this looks like this is what this guy is. And obviously their performances and their personalities, once you get a hold of them, dictate that a little bit. But something I wanted to make sure I mentioned there that is hard to quantify, but is absolutely at the top of the pyramid in terms of importance, is how you move those pieces on the board.
Well, and you touched just a few minutes ago, you talked about offense, and we talked about the 2019, and as you starting to come in, talk about what you were looking for and what you were shooting for after you saw 2018. You know, towards the end of the 2018 season, our bats really kind of came alive, especially getting into the playoffs, for what they really were. And then when you get into 2019, what were you looking for? Give us some ideas between the two of you guys of what you were looking for in personnel and what you were looking for from a skill set to bring to the table.
Jesse, why don't you start on that, and then I'll come in after.
Sure. The 2018 team, not to slight them at all. I mean, there was some pretty special offensive players on that team. When you think of like Danton Hyman and Joe Mason, and the truth is a lot of the guys that were planning to be in Morehead City that summer that maybe would have been offensive weapons that JR had worked hard to put on our roster, we were beat by the draft pretty hard that year, to be honest with you. But as the season progressed, guys like Will Johnson, Craig Lewis, Doherty, those guys came on. Shepard came on. And you're absolutely right, buddy, as that team started to peak late. We played a little bit smaller baseball, if you will. I don't know that we went into the game preparing to win by, a one-run ball game, 3-4 runs, but we knew they were at a premium, and if we could get a lead by the sixth, we felt good with the bullpen. Whereas going into last summer in 19, I guess I used the word prolific earlier, or dynamic. I think JR and myself both are really big on on-base percentages, slugging, combination of that, minimizing punch-outs, that type of thing. But the fact that we were able to bring in guys that could do so many different things within the order in 19, was pretty impressive. What like Jack Harris did against Shepard. I think that we were more of an extended lineup in 19 than what we were in 18, and that translated into being more of a JR's a numbers guy, but I'm guessing 7+ runs a game, somewhere in that area, on average in 19. So I think that's a big part of what we were able to do offensively last year.
Yeah. So we came in, actually, and I was going to touch on it. We came in right at 6.5 runs per game last summer offensively. And I mean, that was a 30% jump, probably roughly, maybe even greater from the output from 2018. Now, it wasn't going back to the roster building component of, hey, let's be more offensive. Something else that I remember being very prominent in our vision last off season was, after kind of what we saw unfold in 2018, is we wanted to be deeper and safe behind the plate at catcher and at shortstop. And, this is just
how'd that work out for you?
Exactly. That's the, and I've kind of got the history here, and that's just kind of the nature of summer collegiate baseball. But I mean, we had 3 big-time catchers signed for 2019, all of whom we really liked and felt great at that spot. 2 of them didn't even get to us. One was a summer school casualty. The other one quit. And then the third guy, we still felt like, when the lights went on, that he was going to be an appropriate number 1. He was going to be a leader. And then we ended up, dismissing him 3 games into the summer. So that board's wiped clean. Shortstop, same thing. We signed 3 big-time guys that we really liked and were confident with. 1 didn't show up. He had pre-draft workouts and then ended up going to the Oakland Athletics in the draft on day 2. Another guy did show up, and we got, 5 starts out of him. And then he got drafted, and he left. And then the third guy, ended up just sort of evolving into more of a utility, a championship caliber, utility 10th man kind of role. So immediately, right before and right after the season started, we have a totally blank slate at 2 critical defensive positions, behind the plate and at shortstop. And, again, that's just part of the nature of the beast and roster building at this level. And so, but that was certainly a component to our story last summer, what we did from there with those positions. Now, the offense just as a whole, part of, I think, the expected improvement that we had 18 to 19, and there may be an entirely different podcast that would have to be dedicated to this, but the conspiracy theory about the defective balls in the Coastal Plain League in 2018 and 2019.
We might save that, and we'll jump on another one of.
Yeah. So just leaving that right there, I think just if nothing else changed, there was an expectation, at least on my part, that there would just be more juice overall. But it turned out way better than that. So 6.5 runs a game. We had a 775 team OPS. We stole 167 bags. which came out to about 3.25 per game and at an 82% success rate. So, I mean, that ended up being a huge value add to the offense. Now it's in the box score, so it's not completely off paper, but it's just where are you cheating extra offense? You know, moving up an extra base on first or third, wild pitches, hit batsmen, errors, but then stealing bases also. And then of course, just within an individual game, the psychology of the pressure that comes with, okay, hey, we're playing the Marlins today. Every coach before every game looks at the stat sheet. Oh, look at that. They're second in the league in steals all summer. They're stealing this many bases. That has a tangible effect on game plan and on in-game decisions. Pitchers know it. The catchers know it. The coach knows it. He's worried about it. So I think in the end, we ended up with this very balanced offensive product in conjunction with, you know, an overpowering pitching staff that limited mistakes, and it was a very competitive recipe.
Well, and Jesse, you know, talk about some of those pieces that JR had just talked about. You know, we'll talk a little bit now. All those things we've talked about, the components of the pitching staff, the offense. Now the players arrive. So Memorial Day weekend, the players start to get here, and talk about those first couple days and what it's like getting to know some of the personalities. Obviously, welcoming some guys back, but talk about those first couple days of the season.
Sure, and in going into that, JR gave me a good pat on the back earlier about deployment of our players. To be quite honest, moving from 17 to 18, I guess when this trio come together here, I became much more informed about our players going into the season in the summer. And that's a job, you know, that I was trying to do while, you know, coaching a college team or recruiting that team. And it's just difficult to stay in close contact with these players. So you mentioned when they come to town, I feel much more informed about expectations of our players now that the JR is on board. And I think that communication aspect is huge in terms of their commitment to the summer with us. And understanding what they're going into. But you mentioned day one with these guys. The idea that we talk about this culture, that starts the first minute we get together as a bunch. We talk about expectations on and off the field, interaction with fans, and how important and valuable our host families are and the fan base in Morehead City. So opening day, the very first day that we get together, we talk about culture and expectations. And JR kind of mentioned he gave you guys an insight to the realities of what broke down going into opening night last year. I mean, literally nights before that, we didn't have a catcher on roster that was going to show up that day. And we somehow make it work. But I guess it was about 3 weeks in where we were holding our head above water. You know, we weren't off the game one, and I think we ran off 9 or so after that. In 19, we weren't quite to that start. You know, we'd win a game or two, lose one. Quite proud we never, you know, until late in the year did not even have a losing streak. But again, we weren't kind of performing at the clip that we were anticipating. And then there became this point where we added a guy. And it's quite ironic because he's a guy that wasn't very offensive when he got here. But the minute he got here, Brian Kowalski locks down shortstop, and we run off 14 straight from his first start. So that was a key piece there. And then, you know, actually late in the year in the playoffs, he was a huge part of the offense in the playoffs and scoring runs and RBIs. But I think that as time went on, plugging in guys like Kowalski, Zach Miller, Tyrus Barclay at those positions and what they brought to the table, not just performance-wise, but also the energy that they played with and fit right into the scheme of things, we kind of hit stride about, you know, midsummer on that, literally on the day that Kowalski got here. And certainly not to slight what Daniel Little had done to that point, but his ability to move around from second to third to short and the ability to be able to deploy him as a pinch hitter in a situation we felt good about. It's just kind of how the recipe came together and the constant work to build a team during the summer.
Well, and I tell you, I think even, you know, JR, before you jump in there, you talked a little bit about kind of putting that thing together and when they get there and, you know, it's a little bit different, especially when you talk about those days before where we're all sitting around going, anybody know where we can find a catcher? But JR,
Right.
What were you going to say on that?
No, that's right. And that's also, I mean, when you look back, when you're in it, it's not fun. It's uncomfortable. It's a challenge. But even right after that point, and certainly retrospectively, like at this point, that's the fun of it too, because every team and every summer is different and the challenges are unique. And then that sort of cultivates the distinction in the personality, the mark that each team leaves on the fans or the community or us internally as a baseball operation that go into our memories. So, you don't trade that for anything. And then obviously you love when it works out. But so the start of the season. So the word that I use is roller coaster. And Jesse talked about it. It was precisely 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and understanding that it's a 52 game regular season. At the quarter mark, we were 7-6. 2 days later, we were 8-7, and then the historic and magical run began.
Well, and JR, before you even get into that, when you start talking about that start to the season,
yes.
Jesse, I remember you and I sitting in the office, kind of looking at each other, going, "We even got a shot to make the playoffs this year." Going, man, is this team going to be any good? And I just remember JR on the phone going, "Guys, relax, pump the brakes." We're like, "This guy's crazy." I don't know. Like we're in trouble right now. We better go find some pieces. And to me, that was just kind of the roller coaster.
Yeah. And the beginning or the early stages of summer collegiate baseball are very typically, fraught with that chaos and inconsistency. By no means was that adversity a unique condition. And one of the things that we try to strategize as a baseball operation is limiting that period, that start of the season, that wild ride, the length of that period. So the shorter the distance between opening day and becoming the team that you are going to be, that you want to be, the better off you are for the balance of the summer. And it just didn't work out that way for us in 2019. It didn't necessarily go to script. And I think the reasons for that were myriad. We discussed earlier about having to remake ourselves at shortstop and catcher. That's also the point on the schedule, that first quarter, when you are awaiting players who are late from the college playoffs. And we had more of those players than usual in 2019. And then the MLB, the Major League Baseball draft, occurs roughly 10 days into our season. And we sort of got hit from multiple angles in that regard. And it just took us a little longer to get our head back above water. But as we've touched on, we were still winning games, playing roughly 500 ball. So we didn't bury ourselves either. And that's a huge key, because every win, even though they all feel differently, depending on the night and where you are in the schedule, and even sometimes who the opponent is, every win carries the same mathematical value at the end of a half and at the end of the season. And so an important takeaway there, especially in a game like baseball, where there's so many games and they come so often, usually every day, is to not become hyper-focused on that early small sample of action and results and fall into the rut of, okay, this is who we are. Instead, and this goes back to culture, but also our coaching staff, our leadership, starting with Jesse, keep working, keep recruiting, continue improving, hold the line and an even keel, and trust the process. And, again, just I can't give enough credit to the guys, who are on the ground there. Fico obviously is the number 2 man, and then starting with Jesse in terms of holding that condition until the cavalry came, so to speak, with some of those additions that you mentioned. Something else that comes out of a period like that is useful and instructive, and you hope includes some positives in the early stages, is you find out about kids, and that has a cascading impact on the balance of the summer. So maybe somebody plays more than they otherwise would have, and that helps you put them in a better position to succeed later on. Maybe a player exceeds expectations and takes hold of a role that he doesn't relinquish the rest of the summer. And maybe he doesn't grow into that confidence or even have the opportunity to show us that he can be that without that chaos early on. And then the last thing is there are some non-analytical traits that get revealed. So how hard is a kid willing to work? Will he make adjustments? Does he show the same approach and professionalism even when things get a little dirty, a little murkier? And those intangible characteristics, I think, are part of what the bedrock of, Marlin made, Marlin men.
Well, and I think you're right. And I think that's something where I said we saw that group, and to me, that's when things kind of changed roughly about halfway into the season. And, it started where the 2019 was almost a team of breaking streaks. I mean, you start talking about records. I mean, countless records, not just Marlin records, but CPL records that this team was able to beat. And none of them was any better than starting right at home with a 17-1 win against Wilson. And you mentioned, Jesse, it was Kowalski's first night at shortstop. And, another dubious streak, and I'm sure he'll probably laugh at us for this, but heck, he started the season, 0 for 38? Something like that, 0 for 40. We kind of had some good laughs at that. But, that's when really the magic started of breaking the Coastal Plain League win record. And let's talk about that magic 14-game stretch and some of the ups and downs. Jesse, kind of talk us through, and JR, you both have some numbers. Talk us through that streak. Give us some insight as to really what was going on and what went through y'all's mind during that time.
Who was game one? I think you said Wilson. It was Wilmington. It was Wilmington. Okay.
Wilmington.
Mm-hmm. And it was one of the three, I think, blowout wins we had that year.
Sure. And prior to that night, obviously, we've touched on some things that we were working on to get better at, and I think that we were starting to hit stride there. But the main issue that we had up to that point was defensive miscues. We were doing a good thing offensively. We were doing enough on the mound. Situational hitting was really good up to that point. But up to that night, we would make a mistake or two on the field that may or may not cost us every 3 or 4 games. And starting that night, we kind of honed in defensively and took care of the baseball better. And honestly, the wins, 1 or 2 or 3 started happening, and that was cool. We didn't think much of it. And then 5, 6, 7, it's like, well, this is pretty neat. And then it just got weird from that point, man. It was like that was the thing is, oh, what? Okay, this is weird. That's 10, that's 11, that's 12. And I don't even want to talk about the 14th one because I almost messed that whole thing up that night, to be honest with you.
Oh, I can't wait to hear about this.
Don't worry. We're gonna get into that. We're gonna get into that. Don't worry about it.
Sure.
Some of the ironies, but to kind of take it back, even before that, JR, with your background in Edenton and really, building Edenton before you got to Morehead City, it was almost ironic that you held the previous CPO record win streak with Edenton at 13, and we tied the record in Edenton with you and I sitting in the stands that night. Talk us about that night.
Right. So, well, let me back up a second before we get to the highlights of 13 and 14. I want to show a little bit of respect for the game itself and also our opponent. Talking about the entire structure of the stream, just acknowledging that you don't have any kind of sustained success in any sport without a lucky call, a bounce here or there going your way, and just the number of close games that comprise part of that streak. So I think what I broke down here was so 4 of the 14, if you count game 14, were 1-run games. 6 of the games, if you count game 13, were 2 runs or 3 runs. And I think that shows you just how competitive the baseball was throughout that. It wasn't all cakewalks. Our boys were having to stay locked in, stay focused, finish games, execute, the plan night in and night out that we gave them. And they were doing that. And they were in leverage situations where, hey, the game is on the line in the 7th, 8th, and 9th innings. And, you said only 3 of the wins were blowouts. That's right. Exactly half of the 14 games were on the road. And, baseball is just not inherently designed to allow that kind of sustained success. So by the end of it, truly one of the greatest accomplishments that I've been a part of in baseball, you just sit back and understand, that you're witnessing something pretty special. So, all right. So then, buddy, like you mentioned, game 13, July 2nd, we're at historic Hicks Field trying to tie the record. There's a lot going on here. It's the final season of the Edenton Steamers and historic Hicks Field in the Coastal Plain League. Their franchise had held the record since 2004. You mentioned my connection to that program. And I was able to be in attendance with you, our owner. And, the game had been knotted at 4 since the 4th inning. We get to the top of the 9th. Hunter Shepard and Zach Miller, who we are both thrilled to have coming back to us for 2020 this summer. They go back-to-back jacks to lead off the inning, give us the 6-4 lead, and set up the road save. And for any of our viewers who are not familiar with historic Hicks Field, it is a small park, to say the least. Balls fly out of there.
7 to even feel good.
Yeah, no lead is safe. I mean, even mistake swings get hit out of there sometimes. They've got 9-1-2 coming up in the batting order. We get the leadoff guy, and then their leadoff hitter draws the 1-out walk. Then they pinch hit with one of the best all-around hitters in the league, Ian Walters. So he's the tying run at the plate. So right away, we've got the small ballpark, the runner's on. That pressure is right there in terms of completing that game. It was never a situation where, hey, no matter what, this guy can't, tie the game or blow the save. And Zach Miller, who had just hit the home run in the top of the ninth to give us the 6-4 lead, he erases the walk by throwing out the guy attempting to steal second. And then Henke strikes out Walters. And that was a 6-out save, by the way, for Cal. And, pandemonium ensued, and we tied the record. So
not sure why Miller got that opportunity in a 2-run game at that park, but I'm glad he made the play.
Yeah, and I remember that first shot by Hunter Shepard. That ball got out of there in a hurry, in an absolute hurry down the right field line.
Jesse, which game was it, 13 or 14, that you just made a joke earlier that you felt like you almost undid it? What were you talking about?
We can skip over it. We can go through that first loss. So the 14th win, the record-breaking win. And actually, buddy, you mentioned how ironic it was that JR was a part of the previous record and having us tie with Edenton, and then that game tire being at Edenton. It's also ironic that I believe the head coach of that team is also my colleague and head coach at Mount Olive. So it was a combination where Coach Watt and JR were combined to win that 13-game streak.
Yeah.
And just a fun in-house thing with Mount Olive is that, I was a part of beating in that streak with JR. So that's kind of neat, but I really almost costed us that one. We were home that night versus Peninsula. Historic team, Hank Morgan. The Morgans do an awesome job up there. Out-of-division opponent who we're not as familiar with. We have a large amount of respect for, the tradition and the caliber of team that they have. And we come out playing pretty good that night. I'm not sure, somewhere around mid-game we pulled away a little bit, or so we thought. And I don't know the exact numbers, but we're getting late in that game. I had a kid that needed some work, and I'm running him out on the mound, and he's throwing well. He gets kind of a bad contact single followed by like a competitive walk. And all of a sudden, kind of things start slipping away a little bit. And I use the word slipping because it was like, not to make an excuse, but an extremely humid night, moist night in Morehead City. And we make a change to go to Leo Perez, who's been really good for us. He's been shut down.
And Jesse, correct me if I'm wrong. This was in the top of the 9th inning, correct?
This is the top of the 9th. And I believe we were maybe up 7 going into it.
Yeah. I'll break it down exactly when it comes back to me, but keep going with the color.
Yeah, so we go to Leo, who's shut down. He's been in that moment several times. I believe he's, out there with a 4-run lead, and just somehow, some way, it gets away from us. And you could just feel it slipping pitch by pitch. Like things are just getting away, and they go up on us. But the whole inning, it's like, oh my goodness, like we were so close. We were, 2 outs away from finishing this record, and just totally slips out of our grasp. The boys come in off the field, and it's like, all right, what's up? Let's win this thing. And it's like they aren't shaking at all. And I'm like, what in the world? I mean, can't they just feel the doom that just happened? And they weren't shooken a single bit. I mean, those guys were ready to go back out there. Somehow.
I think it was – we give up an 8 spot? Was it an 8 or a 9 spot, JR?
I think we did.
It was 8.
The 8 in the 9th, right?
That's right.
And obviously the moment that Colby Johnson had there with 2 outs, 2 strikes. And I mean, I think that we knew in the splits that a left-handed pitching matchup was good for Colby Johnson. We had discussed that prior to that point, but I mean, who knows that the Cards are going to line up in that moment and going to hit a walk-off to break that record. But, yeah,
and JR,
the old coach almost screwed that one up.
well, JR, talk a little bit about some of the numbers, and then we'll get into the bottom of the ninth, because I think there were some things that led up before that home run that even happened. But JR, talk a little bit about some of the statistical breakdown of that game, not just in the top of the ninth, and then we'll start getting into the bottom of the ninth.
Yeah. So and so prior to the on-field stuff, I just want to relay sort of my, romantic and emotional connection, because I was there again. And it's game 14, July 3rd. We're back at home. The stars have aligned. Puck O'Neill Field at Big Rock Stadium in front of our fans. Everyone in the crowd, in the community, knows what's going on, knows what's at stake. It's the eve of the July 4th holiday. We got the day off the next day. I don't know where the attendance was reported, but I mean, it felt like there was 1,000 people in the ballpark by the time people got off their shifts, and then also the group that comes by to socialize and get a drink and catch the ends of games. But regardless of what the exact numbers were, it was very electric feeling all night at the ballpark. So we take the 10-4 lead into the top of the ninth. And I think, from my perspective, again, outside the dugout, it was almost like maybe we exhaled, 3 outs too early, because we had played such a complete ball game to that point for 8 innings. We'd put up 10 runs. We'd only given up 4. We'd limited mistakes. It was just looking and feeling like another typical Marlins 2019 team win, particularly, in the midst of this streak. And so top of the ninth, walk, infield hit, walk to load the bases. And you mentioned how, the humidity was just in rarefied form that night. And so, I mean, you could actually see the pitcher having trouble gripping the ball and leading to some of the wildness that led up to that point. All right, so then an infield error, hit batsman, and another walk bring in 3 runs. It's 10-7. At some point in there, you mentioned Leo comes into the game, and I'm not sure if it was at that point or during it, but it's still 10-7, bases loaded, 1 out. We get the second out. And at that point, I remember feeling, okay, this was a mess, but we've regained control of the inning. We're 1 out away. We still have a 3-run lead. Yes, the bases are loaded, but you understand the difficulty and the leverage of trying to plate 3 runs with only 1 out to work with. But 2-run single, and it's a 1-run game, and then the 3-run homer for the lead change. So by the time we get out of there, the 10, the bottom of the ninth. And just like how we struggled in the top with a slippery ball or just the pressure of it, whatever the magic was, Peninsula starts kicking the ball around a little bit to give us life. So we get back-to-back 1-out singles. A fielding error allows a base advance to third. Then a wild pitch moves the trail runner up. So it's second and third with 1 out. Then we strike out. So then it's 2 outs. Runners at second and third, down by 2. Enter Colby Johnson. 2 strikes, 2 outs, down by 2. And
Jared, Jesse, correct me if I'm wrong. I think the first 2 pitches were I think they were fastballs that he threw right by Colby. I mean, almost made him look pretty bad with that first 2 swings.
I'm not sure. I mean, the pitcher was doing a good job. He was effective, to be honest with you. And I'm not sure I think the pitch he hit might have been a breaker, but he was effective the whole at bat.
Mm-hmm.
No, buddy, you're absolutely right. I went back and sort of watched the play-by-play from what led up to that, and it was 2 fastballs, from a left-hander against Colby Johnson, who Jesse mentioned. We liked that matchup. He had really seen southpaw as well all summer, and they were just well-located fastballs with good velocity. And real quick 0-2. I think he spat on a breaking ball to take it to 1-2, and then they went back to it, and it just ended up being a little bit too much of the plate, not as much 2-plane action to get underneath the swing, and it just went right into the wheelhouse for Colby. And, he did what he did, and, the melee ensued. And then, so just before I kick it back to you guys, just coming back to me. So as that moment unfolds, I just remember the disbelief from having blown the lead and the fashion in which we did it. It was like, trying to come to grips with, so this is how we are not going to get 14, just the magic number, 13's unlucky, weren't meant to break it. You're starting to come to grips with those things. And then the manner in which we came back and walked off. So my emotions just swung the full pendulum of disbelief. And I'd been standing up for an hour at that point, pretty much the entirety of the ninth inning, which did last probably close to an hour. And when that happened, I just sat down on the picnic table, and I didn't celebrate. I couldn't feel at all. It was just such an overwhelming moment. People are rushing up to me with excitement, congratulations. And I couldn't tell you the identities of any of those people. It could have been my mother, it could have been Jesus, and I wouldn't have known who it was, because I just couldn't get a grip on the moment. But then you come to, and obviously when you're a coach or in some kind of an official capacity with any team, and you witness the elation, which combines the human and the athletic of the players involved in that moment, something that'll never be able to be taken away from them or us, from our perspectives for that matter. And, it just really sunk in.
And I was kind of the same thing. I mean, during the whole kind of the 7th, 8th, and into the 9th inning, you mentioned Peninsula, and we have a great relationship with Hank and Henry, their owner. Their owner, Henry, was there, and I was standing with him in the beer garden. And him and I were talking, and I remember just, the entire 9th inning as they started hitting, I kind of just put my head down, and he was kind of laughing at me a little bit. And man, I kind of felt a little bad when we got into the bottom of the 9th inning. And I mean, when he hung that breaking ball and Colby hit it a mile, I mean, the minute it left his bat, you knew it was gone. I mean, the way our ballpark plays in left field, everybody knew that ball was gone. And kind of, JR, was kind of the same feeling. You're kind of in that numbness. And where I was standing next to the owner, you don't really want to like jump up and down, but internally you kind of do. I mean, it's impressive. 14 straight wins, no matter what you're doing, is impressive.
Well, I felt relieved, to be honest with you.
Jesse couldn't even enjoy it.
I was just relieved.
You're probably a little different going, all right, I didn't screw the pooch completely on that one.
Absolutely how I was feeling.
Kind of kept you in a good frame of mind on things. Well, it's always a fun piece. But now, obviously, once we got through that part and we started getting to what we'll call the back half of the season, that kind of led us down the stretch. Talk us a little bit about, we started the season, we talked about the roller coaster. We went on a 14-game win streak. We ended up winning the first half, which was back-to-back first half championships, which is something we've never done in Marlin history. And now we get into the second half, and a lot of times you'll start to see a little bit of a letdown. You'll start to see guys kind of take it a little bit easy, and talk a little bit about how you kind of got that transition and got through some of that into the back half of that season.
These guys, you always fear that. You get the first half underway, you get it under your belt, you're in the playoffs, and you do fear that in terms of in the dugout, night to night. You just worry that there may be a lull there, or we might not bring the same energy from a night-to-night basis. But these guys weren't that way. And that's the credit they deserve, because they brought it. And I guess from a managing standpoint, it just kind of allowed us to make sure that guys stayed fresh, got their work. We didn't have to overextend or exert anyone to get a certain win during that frame. But they played with the same energy, same desire to win, a ton of looseness, but they did that from the beginning, to be honest with you. And then again, there was like some key additions throughout the year. If you look at the stat sheet, you don't recognize how impactful guys like Ryder Yackel were, Jack Myers, and even, before that, when we bring in Dusty Baker early in the year, he came out of the gates just bonkers. Absolutely ridiculous what he did. Kenny Wells showed back up in town, and I didn't know these guys were any fun at all until Kenny got there. But when Kenny returns from 18 to 19 midsummer, I probably shouldn't say on air, but he brought some energy and some looseness to the group, and that was cool. He says he was the goon, so I appreciated him showing up. But the second half, the guys kept rolling, and we mentioned that first streak of 14 wins. The late in the year, we won quite a few ball games leading into the postseason as well.
You did, and you talk about that. We won 13 of our last 15 games, and it's something that you saw again. Similarities between the 18 and the 19 team was the last 2 weeks of the season, how vital they were to playing good quality baseball and making the wheels really spin. But those were things that were extremely important coming down the stretch.
Yeah, so just sort of tying it all together, again, as a summary compliment to the entire team. So outside of the 14-game winning streak, on the balance of the year, we played 622 baseball. And then even after the potential hangover of the streak, we finished at 682. We went 15-7 the rest of the way prior to the playoffs. After the streak, that's 682 ball. And I think that's just a real nice feather, a nice indicator of how consistent and talented the group was. And Jesse, you talked about their approach, and I use the word professional, ironically, even though it's amateur ball, because they never got too low or too high. And I think that allowed us to handle the adversity at the beginning of the season and then the unmatched high of the historic winning streak. And you mentioned the two big late acquisitions that both happened to be on the mound, Jack Myers and Ryder Yakel, and two guys that, again, we are thrilled to have back in the fold for 2020. And Myers debuted at Peninsula, and that's the best offense in the CPL last summer, and really one of the best offenses in league history when you look at their slash production. So I think the team single season OPS record in the CPL is 833 by one of those powerful old Thomasville High Toms clubs, or High Point Thomasville High Toms clubs. And Peninsula last year finished at 823, 10 points off of that. They didn't have a dead spot in their lineup. They were just tough to pitch to and handle 1 through 9, something that's very enviable in any summer for an offense. And Myers went out there in a short start and immediately gave, I think, our coaching staff and myself the confidence that, okay, come the stretch, come playoff time, we had another bullet who could perform at the level we wanted over an extended period. So that was important. And then Yakel just, I call him the assassin. No command hiccups or lag period after the long break he'd had from his to when he showed up with us in the summer. And basically his performance and role allowed us to cinch the back of the bullpen to where if we got into any high leverage situation, we knew we could count on Yakel and Henke to get the last 9 outs to finish the game, the way we wanted to. And those are huge, specific roles and markers when it gets down to, the nut cutting time, whether it's the stretch, if you're playing for a spot, or actually in the playoffs.
Yeah. And Yakel being here, if you look at the way the playoffs played out, that allowed us to extend Henke the way that we did comfortably. Just knowing that we had another guy in Ryder that was comfortable in that role late in the game to get the last out, that was extremely valuable. And then as JR mentioned, Myers had a huge performance at Peninsula, a night that I was not actually even there, but I followed it, via the web. Pico Conless 2-0 as an interim head coach over the last 2 summers.
So for any of you organizations that are watching, you remember
that's
that.
Right. That's right.
That guy should have a head gig. I'm embarrassed for everyone that didn't hire him and had a chance to.
Agreed. But, Myers, had a great night there, and we felt, kind of an ace in the hole there. We felt very good to, even though he didn't start the last game of the summer in the playoffs, in essence, he was our length guy that game, and we knew that and felt good about him going into that situation. Going back, where, Buddy, you mentioned 13 out of the last 15, I believe the key game there was when we beat Wilson. And to give credit to The Wilson Tobbs, that organization, that team gave us fits last summer. I think we had lost the first 3 of our 4 contests with them.
That sounds right.
Yeah, one of them, first one was a close one, then a blowout by them. And actually, the only losing streak we had last summer was a 3-gamer, and 2 of those 3 were to them, where we stacked up with them, 2 out of 3 nights in a row. But those guys, we finally beat them somewhere in late July. And I think that was key for our club to realize, okay, we're pretty good and we can beat this team in the other division that's making some noise. And to do it that late in the summer, I think that kind of springboarded us a little bit for that last push in the end of the regular season. And that was important because that win was fresh on our guys' minds for that second round game versus Wilson. I think that was very valuable.
So to put a bow on it for me in terms of the end of the regular season, and I'll send it back to Jesse because I think he can certainly speak to this with more authority, but it seemed to me like the boys settled on the outcome of a championship being the only acceptable conclusion. They'd won both division halves, giving us 4 in a row. They had the streak in their pocket for posterity's sake. And it just seemed like the resting pulse of the club was that we needed to finish this thing off properly and get that second ring. And it just never wavered. I think they were more confident than any of us old guys, who've kind of seen all manner of paths and results that occur in short series and playoff conditions and competition. They were sort of, to a man, just sort of like, well, yeah, we just got to play the games, and of course we're gonna finish this thing out. We're gonna bring it home, and darn if they didn't, execute that.
You're absolutely right, and that's there's no other way to put it. That was just their mindset. That's what they were there to do. But to recognize the sacrifice that takes and how that mindset just doesn't come that easy. These guys some of them hadn't been home since Christmas. They're missing family. They've not had a day off. They went from spring season right into extended summer ball season. And the truth is that for some players, it comes a point where, okay, this was fun. Let's get back to my everyday life and school life. But these guys, that was not their mindset at all. And I do think the 18 club, again, bringing that first ring there, and from day one, that being our plan in 19, and then making their own mark and having a vision, man, for what they wanted to do. These guys became so appreciative of one another. Their relationships with one another, their friendships were really valuable to them that they didn't want it to end. And I think you can see that casual confidence, like in the Marlin minutes before the game with these guys when we did those things with our media folks, and you just saw that casual confidence that they had, and that's what they were there to do, is win another championship.
Wait, and I know we stressed a lot, especially internally, that was, that's always our goal every year, is to make sure that we're winning on and off the field. And, I think guys really did a great job, and coming down the stretch, I think that those were the important things to make sure we really finished the regular season strong, kind of getting us ready for the playoffs. But guys, as we continue to move forward, we appreciate your insights in talking about the 2019 regular season and composition of the team. And we'll be back every week. Every Friday, you can join us right back here with Jesse and JR. We're going to continue as we go down and talk getting into the 2020 season. Next week, we're going to talk about the 2019 playoffs. And you talk about a roller coaster, JR, man, that was a roller coaster, kind of getting into that, and talk about some of the differences between the 2018 and the 2019 run. I think there were some similarities, some differences. We'll give some very in-depth background to that and what we saw on our end and what the players saw moving into it. And then we'll start to talk about the 2020 season. And as we're continuing to move forward, we're monitoring the situation that's going on in our state and our country right now. And on behalf of the Marlins organization, I believe the Coastal Plain League, we're monitoring it day by day, and we're doing everything that we can to make sure that our players, our fans are safe, and that we can get people back to life as normal and get them into the ballpark. We want to do everything we can to get our kids there, to get our fans there, but we want to make sure that we're doing it at a safe environment. But gentlemen, I certainly appreciate you guys taking time to do this. We look forward to continuing this each and every Friday from now through hopefully the end of the season, and giving people a little bit more of an inside look at the Morehead City Marlin organization, both on and off the field.
Sure. A lot of fun. Always like hanging out with you guys and talking ball. And this was a good one.
It's good to see you fellas. No telling how good this beer will be in another week. So come see us again.
Well, guys, thank you so much. And we look forward to catching back up next Friday.